I'd like to call to order the budget sub-meeting. Just for those here and online, we are recording this meeting. Thank you to Mr. Langell and our mayors for attending tonight's budget meeting. We appreciate it. We will start with fiscal year 26 operating budget requests.
Great, thanks. Actually, I just want to make sure on the screen here, can someone give us a thumbs up that you can hear us at home?
Ina.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It wasn't doing the little highlight there.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you, Actually, we have some guests here, so I'll turn over to the superintendent to say.
All right, excuse, Brian, if you turn or you gotta really project, they can't hear.
All right. Before I turn it over, all right, let's see here. Share my screen. And Rebecca, you have the screen there showing?
What?
Is it showing there?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. We'll jump in. We do have some guests here tonight. We have Mayor Headland, Chief of Staff Langell joining us. We have folks, obviously school committee. We have some folks from the school department. We have folks here that could potentially answer questions that pop up, our administrators. And I see Mike is here, WEA is here, so if I missed anyone, I apologize. So what we want to start with is just revisiting our FY 26 operating budget request and supplemental needs list. The committee, school committee had their public hearing last Thursday where they heard the request of the school department. We're bringing it back here one more time to budget sub to have any discussions or ask any questions around what we're submitting as a budget request. And then the school committee convenes again on March 27th to vote the school department budget, which will then we'll send a memo over to the mayor's office with our request. And then it goes through the budget process of the town, which the chief of staff can, when he gives an update, can talk about that process. So this year and last year, we've talked a lot about budget and the four factors impacting the budgets. And it's not unique to Weymouth, it's everywhere. And it's really two drivers are on the revenue side, two drivers on the expense side. So on the revenue side, we see, at the end of ESSER, one-time money. And we know that one-time money is great for one-time things, but it's not sustainable. So that's been a factor. We got an infusion of almost 12% of our operating budget one time with ESSER money. We spent that. That money is now gone. That had great impacts last year on the budget process. This year, in particular, seeing declining revenues. Chief of Staff will talk about locally those revenues, but we see declining revenues at the state level and at the federal level as well. On the expense side, the two big factors for us is inflation and the growing needs of our students. We've had to add staff, which we'll talk about in a moment. And inflation, everyone's feeling the inflation piece, right? I mean, for us, the huge inflation areas are with our utilities, maintenance, and then our transportation costs that have been impacted by inflation. So those factors have led to what we've gone through this year and last year is the exercise of getting a balanced budget. So the way we approach it, as we always do, is, what's our level of service budget? What needs, what are our prioritized high needs that we can address? And then we lost a little sight of this last year, but we're bringing back that complete needs list that we have always attached since I've been here to send over as part of our budgetary request. Now, for us this year, a level service increase was about 3.02%. And in addition to that, since our budget last year, we've had to add a number of positions that you see here under compliance. It's not all compliance, it's also positions that we've added that the superintendent will get into when she gives an update around safety and making sure our buildings are safe. In addition to that, we have our needs list, which we'll touch on. And of our needs list, we prioritized positions that total this $399,000. And then the final piece, as I mentioned, is inflation, in particular around transportation. So for the first time, we are taking out of our circuit breaker allocation funds to cover our transportation costs that are above and beyond our operating budget. Again, those are one-time funds and you can't rely on them year to year. So you have to factor that into your operating budget. So for the school department, after meeting, a number of meetings with our department heads and principals, our projected costs for next year, everything as it is now, factoring the positions we've added since last year's budget process and positions we're projecting and prioritizing for next year, our operating request is $92,079,118. That's a 5.27% increase. Now, we're realistic. We're not out of touch with the news and everything that's going on. So we've had to prepare and think about if we get anything less than that. And so we are seeing a potential shortfall of 1.9 million, which we've talked about in past meetings. We have ways to address that without significant impact to the school department. And in that number, our level service, what we're saying, if that's the number that revenues can support, we're looking at potentially the reduction of 26 positions. And as I mentioned, our full needs list is attached, and I'll bring that up here. So our full needs list is this list here that it's basically it is composed of any requests from our principals or departments, whether it be SPED, transportation, maintenance. So the administrative team has gone through, and we actually did this exercise again yesterday, going through with our principals, going through this list. I have a couple principals here tonight with anyone has questions. And we've prioritized this needs list and highlighted what we feel are either compliance or related to safety that are just the highest priority for us. So these positions that are highlighted total the $399,000 that you see in this line. Again, this line is positions that we've added since last year's budget process. And then the transportation is the increase in cost above operating that we would need funding for going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to the superintendent to speak a little bit more about the process and the needs in particular.
Thanks, Brian. I'm just going to do just a quick background. I think Brian and Alyssa do an amazing job simplifying all the numbers for us, but the reality is the amount of work that goes into creating the fund. We as an administrative team are in our schools every week. We're in our classrooms every week. We're talking to our staff. We meet as a principals team every other week to go over this information. We've had over 20 budget hearings here at the Adams Building, and then those budget hearings turn into budget presentations at Budget Sub. We've been listening to all of our parents that come to our meetings, and we've met with the mayor and the chief of staff as well at the town. And as Brian had mentioned, we've added, since we created last year's budget, $750,000 to this year's budget. And that's not all compliance. A lot of that is from us being in the buildings and listening to the staff. We added 2 amazing RBTs this year because we were hearing some safety concerns. Those were not compliance. We did not have to add those positions. That was us being in the schools, listening to our staff, and finding great solutions to supporting those teachers. We also added lead teachers in some of the buildings that lost their assistant principals. So those are things that we're doing throughout the year as the needs come up. Our proposed budget of $92 million, we believe addresses the high needs that are being requested by all of our principals in our departments. It is a 5.27% increase, as Brian had said, and that's an addition of 10 plus, I think maybe even 11 positions over the level service that we have for this year. And as Brian had mentioned, some of the factors that all towns are dealing with. I know people have asked, why aren't you putting all of the needs in your budget? And, for me and our administration team, I honestly think that's being a little bit tone deaf and the economic uncertainty that our town is facing right now. For me to present a budget that's over 8%, given some of the circumstances that we're dealing with, we are trying to get back to a sustainable budget where we're slowly adding what we need. If you see on this slide, the high needs for FY26, as Brian had mentioned, the $399,000, that equates to a little bit over 10 positions that are listed. And you see our future needs. So that's what we keep talking about. The conversations that we're having, we're listening, those are not going away. We're not starting this process all over again next year. So we talk about, there's a NASH teacher potentially based on enrollment that we have to look at for next year. We have to look at our STEAM teachers. We talk about that almost every week. We know that. And we look at assistant principals, BCBAs, and the list goes on. And we understand that, but for us to get those positions, we probably need a few things to happen next year. We look at, there's a growing number of people that are looking to retire, right? And so if we're able to keep our budget balanced, those are the first positions to come back to our town. And we want to make sure they come back in a sustainable way. We don't want to do what we did before, which was throw in, 9 assistant principals and really not have a long-term plan to support all of those. We're really being thoughtful in this process moving forward. At this point, I can turn it over to Ted, the mayor, whoever you want to.
Yes.
Hello, Ted Langell, Chief of Staff. I'm here, and this actually timing worked out well because the mayor and I just came from a department head meeting with all the other town departments to basically give the same information, kind of budget reality to all the departments. So, and then we're scheduling an appointment with the town council budget folks to do the same thing, just so everyone's on the same page. Obviously, the budget process is a long one. A lot of moving parts. What I'm going to do tonight is just give you a snapshot of where we are at this moment. There's definitely more to come. We have to file a balanced budget with town council by April 17th. This is our 10th budget. This is probably the latest it's been to have as many unknowns as we have right now, but I'll go through some of those. But this is just a snapshot of where we are. I will say before I get into the reality of it, I do believe it's getting better before April 17th. It's just a matter of how much, and I'll explain some of those factors as we go through. So what I'm going to do is give you where we are with revenue projections, where we are with the state, where we are with our local receipts, where we are with our tax levy, give you where we are with the budgets that have been submitted and the school budget number that we're using right now. And so I think it's important just to piggyback on what Mel was saying. The budget process has two sides. It has a revenue side and the needs side and the service side of it. It's really important to know, keep in mind the revenue side of it. So we project revenues early every year, and we base our instructions to the departments on that initial projection. And so when we give those instructions, and this year it was contractual obligations that needed to be included. We tried to keep expenses flat for now. And then so we call it a baseline budget this year, which was a little different than previous years, again, just based on revenue projections, because we have to have a balanced budget. So right now, and I'll get to it, we're looking at, again, reality based on that. And so with those projections, every department gives us their needs beyond what those instructions were. So they have a spreadsheet that they send back with following the instructions, and below that on the spreadsheet, they list all of the stuff that's underfunded or additional needs that they have. And that's where the discussion really happens on those needs. So we've in the past preferred that to be separate, because it's our budget process, and that's the reality that we're facing, and we need budgets from departments that reflect that. So it's easier to come up with a end result when we get there. But let me just go through some of the data, if you will, that we have. So current revenue projections right now. On the left side here, you'll see this year's budget. We had and just to emphasize on this one, that new growth line. The reality is the towns become more self-reliant on when it comes to budgets. And the main reason we've been able to grow the budget as successfully as we had the last 9 years is that new growth. And so, we look ahead, to future years where that might be slowing down and there could be some, real trouble ahead. But for 26, we're looking at around the average new growth that we've seen in the last 7 or so years, around $2 million, just to put that in some perspective. Before this administration, that new growth average maybe 600 to 700,000 on an annual basis. So that's where all our revenue growth, if you look at growth throughout the state, we're, in the top 5, I believe, of growing. And without it, we wouldn't have the revenue that we have. We're no different than any other community in that we're limited by Prop 2.5. State aid is, as you'll see, is flat at best. But right now we're looking at a 3.8% growth. I do think you'll see a little later that will probably edge up a little bit. The new growth part of it, I get a range of, so new growth isn't certified till the fall. So we have to project that now. The assessing, what I've done, set up a thing with the assessing gives me a range based on some estimates. So all the new growth that's in FY26 budget is the growth that happened last calendar year. So as of January 1st, they look at what happened last year, give me a range, a low and a high, and I've always picked somewhere in the middle. As you can see here, it was a little less than the projection. Last couple of years, it's been a little less that middle range, so I try to keep that in mind. But we're probably going to be able to increase that 2 million even for FY26. But right now, that's where we are, 3.8% tax revenue growth.
Ted, before you leave that page,
Ted, can I ask a
you
question?
might have the same question. Go ahead.
So what is new growth?
That's what I was just going to ask him. If you could
Explain what
explain
new growth
in more layman's terms or in more detail what new
It's
growth is for a lot of people.
the tax value of new construction, more or less. It's the tax value of
The new growth in the
construction.
tax base.
So is it like building houses?
Yep. So all the buildings that you've seen.
Restaurants?
Yep.
Apartments.
Apartments?
It's
With the mixed use.
it's the new
Just
tax
initial.
growth that's assessed by our assessing department. It's growth in the tax base
So we're
as a result of new construction or increased value.
so every town is capped at 2.5% plus new growth.
Okay.
So that's why the new growth number is important, and that is the tax value, the new tax value, and then the year after that just gets added to the tax base.
So
Let me condense that. So it's what's available to us above and beyond 2.5 based on the limits we have with Prop 2.5.
And if I may, through the chair, you said that we won't know to the fall exactly what that actual number is. So that's
Yeah.
from last year, basically new growth,
This,
right?
the 2 million is the projection for next year. Again, so in 25, the projection was 2.36,
But the actual was. a
but the
little bit
actual
low.
2.2, yeah. But it's negligible as far as the bigger picture. We've always been fairly close, if not even under that number.
Do we ever have a problem with, like you said, you can project what it's gonna bring in, but do we have a problem with it actually residents or collecting the debt? And does that ever
Negligible.
Yeah, no,
really, not that much? And then where does
Most of the
excise tax?
titles and stuff has been on like small, someone dies and the family leaves the house and doesn't pay their taxes.
we've always
Very
collected between, 98, 99% of our taxes.
Is there leeway in how quick they have to be collected, or could they go
Same
out?
as when you pay a tax bill at the
Yeah.
house.
Okay.
And excise tax, is that part of new growth or is that?
Nope, that's actually part of local receipts that we'll
Okay.
talk about.
Okay, great, thank you. I
User
really
fee.
appreciate the explanation.
Any other?
No.
So that's tax levy. Then we have the cherry sheets or state aid. This one's probably the trickiest right now. Usually, the governor's budget comes out in January, gives us a sneak peek, but it's really usually the week that we have to file the budget, the House budget comes out. So which usually just lets me know if the numbers are real or not. So even though the two big ones, which are Chapter 70 and unrestricted general government aid, that UGA one, even though those are only increasing by 1.7, I believe, percent here, and that's been the growth over the last 10 years, unfortunately. So that's one of the challenges we face, is that state aid is always pretty flat. It happens to be that some of these other numbers are increasing fairly significantly. And so everything you see in red, we just had a meeting last week with Senator O'Connor, and one of the things we requested of him is to try to get an idea of if these governor numbers are baseline, if they're realistic, and if not, we need to know, because right now I'm using, even though here you see 3.8% for the revenue side of state aid, I'm using 2% in our estimates right now, because I don't know how real these are. And so I don't know if these increases are formula based. I don't know if it's volume based. We just don't know what's behind the numbers right now. So hopefully I need to get those answers before we file the budget. But there is, when you see the bottom line, there is some potential for growth here as well. I will say one of the things I think about with any of the growth is when I'm looking at a 27 budget, and right now I am kind of looking at 2 years at a time, because I believe our new growth is, according to my assessors, are going to be about a third of what we're used to in 27. Our building permit revenue, because of the slowing down of our internal growth, is coming down. So 27 is shaping up to be a very difficult year. And if we push some of these numbers up to the max and then they don't materialize in 27, we're just compounding the problem. So there's a balance there between meeting the needs and fiscal reality that we have to take into account when we're doing this. So those red numbers are up in the air still, and question marks. Even actually when we left the department head meeting, George Ponce came up to me on that veterans number, and that looked way off to him, and he doesn't even know why it's that high. So things like that we need to verify. And then down the bottom, we have the offsetting of the assessment side of it. So the expense side is at the bottom. And the other one that tends to move around from governor to House to Senate is the charter school sending tuition. So right now it's going up 12%. We need to see if that's a real number or something that the House and Senate agree with.
Can I ask?
Flavor that slightly and just make a comment about Chapter 70 projections. So did 21 years in the Senate, and every year around this time would go in and make a presentation to 8 different school committees every year for 21 years and talk about projections. And if my recollection is correct, the governor's initial submission early in the state budget process was always lower than what we ended up with. The Senate was usually kind of aggressive in trying to push up Chapter 70. And I think there was only 1 year out of 21 years that the ultimate budget resolution number for Chapter 70 was actually lower than the initial governor's presentation. So we're pretty confident that it's not going to go below that. That year was something where the legislature and the administration failed miserably in their projections on revenues. And as the process unfolded, there was a drop off. It's a tough budget year for the state, obviously, but it would be surprising if it did go below the governor's initial submission.
And you can see that in the FY25 numbers here, that FY25 budget, the 41.5, and then the state final was 41.7. But on the other side of that, if you look down at assessments, the assessments were also higher than the town budget, which was based mostly on the governor's budget. So you have to look at both sides of that. But there's some hope for some added revenue.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, sorry.
Can I ask a question about charter school? So we don't get reimbursed for that, right?
We do, right here.
We get some of it.
Oh, it doesn't fully reimburse us.
Right. Are we allowed to opt out of sending Weymouth kids there, or limit how many kids can go there? Because it obviously hurts us.
No, I think it's
No,
not.
it's parental placed child is their right is education.
Well, we do, as Ted mentioned, though, before we move on, that one of the first numbers we look at each year is the chapter 70 and the charter numbers. And we don't know, as Ted mentioned, like, this is what it's been hovering around, but if this is a new norm, wonderful. But if it's a one-time $500,000 increase, then that's one-time money that we'll have to try to offset again next year and potentially be a cut.
Yep.
If Ted accounted for all of it in his revenue projection.
Thank you.
And that number can change, correct? That's not, we're not for sure that that's the final number.
No, there's still, I mean, it's, again, the House and Senate still need to do their budget. And as the mayor said, traditionally, the bottom line number is rarely less than the governor's number. Even Senator O'Connor last week told us that's usually the baseline. And if anything, it goes up from there. But
And as Brian pointed out in his budget presentation before school committee, and probably every time you do it, you're talking about the timing with you running concurrently with what we have to project, and we'll work off the governor's number. We have to, just based on timing.
Correct.
And then the third chunk of revenue is local receipts and internal transfers. This right now is it's going to end up being a negative number just from all the factors. It's just a matter of, how much. And those factors that are leading to the decline in budgeted or projected local receipts is, again, our building permit revenue. We just had one of our highest revenues on record last year, over $3 million. The same kind of method. We didn't, push the budget revenue projections to that number because now it's, down closer to like 1.5 million. So we didn't create that deficit, luckily, structural deficit. But the building permit revenue is coming down, still higher than, it was, before this administration, but down from the peaks over the last few years. There's no offsetting ARPA funding in our local receipts this year. We have to adjust other revenues to match other actual revenues that are coming in. So every month at the year end, I do a revenue report and look at it. The tricky part this year is, if you recall, we raised a bunch of fees for FY25, including the trash fee and some user fees, licensing and permitting fees that hadn't been done in decades. We don't know the full extent of the impact. We know revenues are increasing in those areas. We just don't know by how much. So we're still reviewing that to see if we can make any increases. I'm having a meeting with the finance department next week to sit down and literally go over line item by line item of the revenue to all agree on a final revenue projections. And then I do believe there's some room to grow the motor vehicle excise revenue. We've been traditionally below that to give us some wiggle room when we need it. So, there could be some room there. But again, overall, local receipts and transfers will likely be
Just clarify for
decreasing.
everyone, when you say room, it's not our ability to raise the tax, but in terms of projection.
Yeah, we don't set the tax at all. The state sets the tax and we just get the money. So the tax, the rate is set. It's just the volume that's increasing, or newer cars out there that increase more, or newer cars that increase the revenue.
Which in this economy, people aren't going to be buying cars as
Yeah.
much.
We've had a pretty good streak of motor vehicle excise, to be honest. And then, so when you sum it all up right now, if you just look at the top number, the bottom number includes the debt exclusion for Chapman, but we're right now with those three factors looking at 2.6. I'm pretty confident that will inch up over 3% when all is said and done. Again, with additional new growth, additional state aid once confirmed, and we're still looking at the local receipts, but I think those are all minimum at this point. And so the only place to go is really up. It's just a matter of how much. And then when you factor in, so here's a list of all the baseline budgets that I discussed from all the different departments. And if you just scroll down to the bottom, even with baseline budgets, right now we're looking at a 1.7 million budget gap. If we're able to increase new growth and the local aid to the, I would say max projections, that gap would probably mostly disappear, but that's only for baseline budgets and but that's still going to be, here you can see it as 3.4%. So it's getting that 2.6, 3.4. And again, if those two things change, we should get pretty close to that, which is a reasonable municipal budget growth. Anything over 3% is, if you look around, there's a lot of towns that would like that. And so we can get there, but it still leaves a lot of needs. And if we go the next information, this top line is adjusting. So these are not currently budgeted, but actual or anticipated expenses that we face. So these aren't even in the budget that we're going to probably barely balance when all is said and done. And, this is just the reality of it. I'm not picking on any departments, but, our fire overtime is gone up more than we thought or wanted. Same thing with some other overtime for other departments. The utility costs are probably underfunded a little bit in our budget. Overall, sometimes it works out, but as the cost goes up, the budgets have really not kept up. There's 3 collective bargaining negotiations. Well, one ongoing, one about to start. That will be hundreds of thousands of dollars needed for the FY26 budget. We're underfunding our overlay as compared to our annual expense. I don't think that's going to be a problem in 26 because our overall overlay fund is enough to cover all of our liabilities. It's just that lately the annual average has been higher. So overlay is the tax relief that we give people if they file a abatement. So that's the money to pay for the abatements. And it's increasing a little bit. Unemployment, and again, not to pick on the department, but most of that expense that's been increased has been school employees. And then across the board, vehicle maintenance has traditionally been underfunded, and we've had to find other ways to help those expenses, which some can it's ongoing, but some are more one time if they're a larger expense for larger equipment and things like that. And then on top of that, so that's stuff that should be in the budget really that isn't. And then, but we figured it out along the way. But as the budgets get tighter, it's harder to figure out. And then on top of that are all the needs, if you will, requests beyond those budget or what should be in the budget and the budget, including the schools 1.9 of compliance and needs. And then all these other departments that need funding beyond their baseline budget. The biggest one here is actually our increased trash and recycling cost. While we did increase the fee and make up 1.2 million on the revenue side of it, the costs keep going up. Traditionally, it's been a budget that we've supplemented significantly. The delta between the revenue and the cost, was getting close to $5 million. And so we added 1.2 back to that by increasing the fee, but there's still a shortfall in the budget itself. But I mean, that's part of, a public service. And then the library, and we haven't got the final quotes yet on our building or liability insurance. We are, projecting a significant increase around 8%, but it could be higher when that comes in, but we'll see. And then our debt service is actually going down in FY26, which has helped that $1.7 million deficit. The debt service is actually going down $900,000. So without that, the shortfall would have been a lot larger. But the thing is we don't, we've been trying to address a lot of our capital needs, bigger capital needs. Debt service is key. And so there's some uncomfortableness with decreasing our debt service because just knowing 30 years of budgeting, municipal budgeting, it's tough to get it back once you cut it, because every other department is going to be more important than borrowing money when the time comes to adding it back. But if we wanted to say continuing the road improvement program, we're going to need to increase the debt service. And then as other big capital items come up, it's the debt service is important. But there will still be stuff falling off over time to be able to fill in. So that's a moving target as well. And then the only other part that I'll say here is, in addition to the tight budget, our free cash, which is unfortunately not certified yet, it's just a timing thing, a lot of turnover in our finance department. And we submitted it a little late and it still hasn't been certified, but it will be the lowest in 4 years, which just reflects the tighter budgets that we've had over the last few years. But that does limit our ability to fund capital expenses, but it also limits what I call the size of our safety net when we have to cover like one-time shortfalls during the budget process. So, overall, again, 3-point-something% increase is a positive thing in any municipal budget. But there are, a lot of challenges that come even with that positive amount.
Before you leave that slide, just to clarify for people that might be a little confused by the debt service line there, the road improvements is just one example of what's funded out of that line item. You need to know that. That's just an example.
Yep.
The whole myriad of everything you see around town that's of capital nature may be out of that if we're not using.
Like the improvements to this building are part of the debt service.
Right. And not all the capital, you may get into that further, but I know we're not here to talk about capital, but operating, but we've been lucky, and it does relate to this as it relates to capital improvements. We've had a number of other sources, the one-time funding through ARPA. We've been very successful with some dedicated line items. For instance, federal line item that's helping us with the Beach Connection project, the host community monies from Enbridge, which was 10 million. All those things have kind of been expended. So we're more reliant on that debt service line item than ever before. And it's been pretty constant, I think, over the 9 years through administration.
Yeah, it's hovered around 10 million.
Yeah. And one of the things that was just as a sidebar to that Ted did great work on. One of the things we discovered when we came in 9 years ago, that line wasn't managed well. We went out and refinanced our debt, much more favorable terms. It gave us a lot more ability to fund projects. So that's a real important line on there. It's not just roads.
And the other key to that is I'm on every debt call. Every time we borrow money, I'm on that call as they answer questions, selling the town. And we project on every debt service 5% interest. And for the last 10 years, we've got a lot of competition. One time we had 16 companies, if you will, bid on our debt, which for our debt consultant was like an all-time high they had seen. So it's really about, selling the town and letting people want to invest in Weymouth. And so we've been lucky enough because of the competition to have low interest rates and allow us to keep that debt level to where it was.
Can I ask about the town census? How important is that? The town census?
It's mandated, so.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
But how important is it to project income or revenue for the town? Does it help at all?
I know there are some grants that are based on our census, as far as some of the money we get from the federal government or others that are based on our census. So it does affect some of the money coming in at that level.
Can I ask, so the free cash is the lowest in 4 years, but what is that number that you're waiting to have certified? Do you know what the number is that you're waiting to have?
We put in for 7.1 million. So it's been between 10 and 13 the last 3 years. But again, in that pot of money has been the 10 million host community. But even you take that delta, so I think of that 7.1, about 4.8 of it, maybe 4.9 is the leftover host community agreement that's going to be going to the West Augusta, most of it to the West Augusta block. That's dedicated to North Weymouth projects, that 4.8. So if you see that delta, that's a small delta between 7.1 and 4.8. That's what we call regular free cash. So, and I can tell you right now, 1.7 of that is gone because that's our snow and ice deficit right now. $1.7 million. So we take that right off the top of free cash. So of that, 1.7 is already spent when it gets certified. And then I have a capital improvement plan right now with a lot of requests, but no funding, because I'm waiting to see what that ends up. We do try to put, and especially looking ahead to now, like FY 27 and maybe 28, really until Southfield gets going again and maybe some of that revenue starts up again that we've been enjoying the last 10 years. We'll probably look at putting some of that into our rainy day stabilization fund too, instead of spending it, but saving it for a much worse year than 26 will be.
And a good question too, and Ted mentioned snow and ice, and the reason you don't see snow and ice in this budget presentation, and many of you know, by state law, it's the one thing that we can deficit spend on, so it's not a projection. We
Can't control
back
Mother
end it
Nature.
through free cash every year, we hope for not a lot of snow.
Yeah, and if we didn't have free cash for it, we'd have to add it to the tax levy the following year to make up the deficit.
Is there a number that you like to stay at in the free cash? Like, is there?
When we came in 9 years ago, we didn't have anything really.
No, I would like a regular free cash to be probably like 10%, like, I mean, yeah, or at least 5 to 10%. Overall, when we're doing the bonding, if those reserves, if you will, that's the number they're kind of looking for of all of our reserves, including free cash. So that $5 to $7 million range. And again, this isn't really 7 million because it's 4.8 of one-time money. So it's closer to that 3, which is a little low. I think that was our free cash on our COVID budget. Amazingly, actually, because we were 1.2 million short on revenue, but we still had a $3 million in free cash.
9 years ago when I came in, what was our free cash number? Like $1.5 million, $2 million or something?
Yeah, and our stabilization was only a little over $1 million.
And I was envious of Braintree, where they were sitting on, I think at that time, 10 or 12 million. And, what's buttressed that free cash number through the years has been the new growth that we talked about in the early slide. You look at Braintree, which kind of
It's not at any.
dilly-dallied with the building moratorium and had debates over different projects and things. And it's been kind of the inverse now. What are their current numbers compared to, $18 million deficit last year, free cash gone? You have to balance a lot of things.
And over this time, we've actually increased our stabilization rainy day from that like 1.1 or 2 million to, around 9 million. And luckily we haven't had to really use it yet, so.
Another question. So your hit list, if this money comes in, where do you start feeding additional money first? Like,
Right now,
because I see the schools on the second page of so there's the adjustment for actual and anticipated. So it's the fire department and all that. But schools are on the second page. How do we get schools up on the first page?
no, that top is what should be in the budget. Yeah. Now, as far as
This five.
I know I know our expense for fire overtime is closer to $2 million and we have a $1 million budget. That's what those things are like.
Okay.
The actual expenses are
So it's at the top.
higher. Well, it's two distinct lists, but we have to deal with the 1.7 and that top first, because that's money we're spending that we don't budget for.
Okay.
That's what that is. So between the 1.7 and that's where any new revenue is going to get eaten up first. And depending on how we figure that out.
Yeah, so this is current year.
Yeah.
This is current year, this is next year
This is
projection.
what we spent, we don't have the money for yet.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then when we want to spend money after that, you're on the top of the
Okay.
list. I mean, I don't look at it like a
I'm just gonna keep poking.
priority.
Does anyone
Our top of this list.
Does anyone have any questions about that section right there?
This one here?
Don't you feel like that could change too, depending on climate too? If there's an incident in town that you need to respond to for police, fire, or whatever, or I don't know, knock on wood, a pandemic. Don't you feel like that needs could potentially change?
Yeah. And again, we have, unfortunately, because it's not the best, we really try not to use, free cash for what technically is a recurring revenue, but we have used free cash to balance that fire overtime. Doing so, thinking we were gonna see it decrease because we did certain things to try to do that. And it did decrease the second year. So we thought we were on a good track, but now this year, there's just a lot of folks out. And it's spiking back up. So we were gonna kind of wait to adjust the budget to see what the real number was first before we, played with it.
As we sit here right now, we have 11 guys out. We have
On the fire
illnesses,
department?
injuries, family medical leave. We have one guy activated in the service that's in Africa. So it's a number of factors.
And how do they fill that? Well, that's a question for another day.
Overtime.
That's how
But
it
that's not enough people to even do the overtime.
Any other questions from the
Wow.
committee? Do you want to open it up to the public now, Ben?
I think Ted
Before-
still has it.
Sure.
Is that it?
Oh,
Yes.
Head done?
Yeah.
Is that the last page?
No, we went over all the challenges we face. That's this part of it here, Proposition 2.5, minimal growth in state aid and cost, exceeding revenue.
And I appreciate, so this, what Ted shared here is really like, because they go through their budget process coming up after school committee votes a budget. And so this is literally what, as Ted mentioned, this is what the department saw today for information. So we can't post this yet because it's still, but once Ted starts his budget process publicly, this information will be shared out again.
I do have one more. So at what point does the town send a letter to the governor and all asking for more funding? Like, do you put in a plea and say,
All the
we have this and we,
No, all the time.
This
We
is
paid,
what we want.
no,
We pay dues to Mass Municipal and
And not to-
organizations to lobby on it.
Yeah,
No,
and not to pick on any one legislature, but I honestly tell them because they get, and I get it, because we were up there too, and you get defensive because you try, what some folks try up there, they file amendments and try to increase it and then they get shot down. And they do mention all the other stuff they do with grants and some other funding, but to be honest with you, and I told them this directly, I would rather you increase, our local aid and let us decide how to spend it instead of coming through grants that are dedicated to things that we don't think we need. And so I'll say stuff like that, but yeah, that's where, one of the focuses should absolutely be for everyone involved in wanting to see this better numbers is the State House.
right in the budget.
And again, that's from folks that were up there.
I appreciate that.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Ted, I know you don't want to talk about capital and you touched on that,
Talk
but
about whatever you want, Kathy.
where, the town is funding 6 modules.
7 modules.
7 modules, so that comes out of cost and we've already got that
Yep.
secured, the 7 modules for our overcrowded elementary school. So, I mean, that, I don't know.
And ones before that too, during our term, we've done it before.
Yeah, you have.
No, there is another list here of all the ways that, the town funds schools, and it's not just the operating budget. 20, like I said, the healthcare, insurance of the active employees, it costs around $20 million and schools are about 13.5 of that. So there's 13.5 million and other things. I'm currently giving the schools $1.3 million in ARPA money through 2026 to offset a nurse, adjustment counselors and safety positions. And that's through the calendar year 2026. And then, the capital stuff of we talk about borrowing of the 6 million, that's general fund borrowing. I think 1.5 of those payments right now are school related projects, obviously not including the debt exclusion that the taxpayers are. So yeah, there's a lot of other ways that the town, supports the schools as well as the taxpayers.
And as Ted mentioned, the opera money, the remaining, so calendar 26 is actually fiscal 27. So one of our strategies could be to take that remaining that we have allocated 27, spend it in 26 to balance the budget. But then guess what? You've pushed the problem out a year again. So that's what we're trying to balance. Last year was a $5.3 million shortfall, and we did some one-time money. We did some increasing of fees, and we did some cuts. And now this year is a 1.9. So that's the reality. What we're facing is we're trying to get the budgets back to being sustainable And you can only do that with non-one-time funds.
Did we have a slide in here? Did I miss it? Or did we not have it in this presentation that shows the percentage over the last number of years of federal versus state versus local receipts that's funding
I don't have a,
schools and the trend?
well, I mean, we had the local aid numbers that again, on average, were 1.7%. It's the governor's budget, $75 a kid, which is actually high.
Right, but overall, we're down to what percentage is it 21%?
29, it's gone from like 30, mid-30s to 29%.
Right, so we're making that up with local receipts. The school budget's taking a greater percentage of overall town spending. And how do we do that? I'm not the federal government with a printing press in my basement. We're doing it
We have to balance the budget.
with
Right.
what we can pull out of new growth, local receipts, the building permits, et cetera. We've been lucky the last couple of years with the ARPA money to, patch it a little bit there. But that's drying up.
So
There's some money.
it's, I know it's like you're talking about, Bob. So it's the reliance on local appropriation to fund our budget. In fiscal 16, it was 36% was really funding from the state. And now it's down to projected 29%. And for us, for chapter 70, and when you factor in the tuition reimbursement and the charter tuition, it's around a $400,000 net increase, which is 0.45% of our current fiscal 25 budget. Basically $68 per student increase.
And what
Doesn't
makes it
touch
more frustrating is look at the trend line on how the state budget has ballooned overall. And, we got the millionaire's tax, and I think the governor made a statement the night of
I made a
the last
statement that
school
was-
committee
yeah.
meeting, sort of contradicting something you said, and then she made a statement that day that none of it would go to education, to chapter 7. So the state share shrinks, ours goes up, and we've got that,
Figure it out.
revenue side of it that we can't, create money like the federal government.
When do Milton's going for an override.
Milton's not the only one. I mean,
So,
almost every
Yes.
community around us is going for an operational override.
And some didn't get them, some pulled them down too.
Well, you're going to see more. I mean, it's in the works.
when would Weymouth do that consideration? And is that a vote? Is that a vote
Election.
on election day? To go for
Well,
it?
you could have.
I think it's special. It could be a-
Well, yeah, it's a little different with our municipal form of government, I think. We'd have to have a special. I don't know how it aligns with, well, put it this way, that's a good question, because in terms of the process, aside from the fact that Weymouth has never approved one,
Right.
I mean, and the only override we've approved was for Chapman. That was a debt service exclusion. So what's the political reality of seeking an override in Weymouth right now? I don't know.
I mean, I'll tell you
You're on the ballot. You know the political.
I don't think you
picture here.
talk override when your growth is over 3%. Like that's healthy growth in a town. I think it's when, that is negligible, like there's no growth, to do anything. I think that's when you start thinking there's no other way. Like we need this to get to 3-something percent. We need an override to get there. But, we've averaged, I think it's 36% townwide over the last 9 years. And I think it's 41% for the schools over the last 9 years. And now we're, it's slowing down, but it's still going to be over 3%. So, I mean, honestly, it could be 27, it could be a year away if everything goes wrong. Right now, it's health insurance. Between FY17 and FY24, our health insurance increased 16% over that gap. Last 2 years, it's increased 21%.
That's my next question.
So the last 2 years, and that's $2.6 million, right off the top in FY26. So we're usually in that 6% range this year. Next year, it's going to be 9.4, I think. Last year was 11%. So that's not sustainable. And we're going to have some conversations about that too. But with revenue coming down and if increases like that keep up, yeah, we're going to have to start talking other ways.
I think that.
Want to explain what talking means?
Crying, but no. No. Yeah, no. Yeah, it's you're gonna have to, I mean, at first, I think you need to figure out, I mean, I personally hate these overrides that are some round number that they're just throwing out there. And that's usually what gets rejected because there doesn't seem to be a lot of thought in it. So you need to identify like, hey, this is what we need, what that number is, how close we can get to it internally, and then maybe talk about, you know, the other ways to bridge that gap.
This has been helpful.
Did you have something, Brian?
No, I decided not.
Appreciate it.
At this time, I'll open it up to the public if you want to come up and sit at that back chair. Anybody?
That's,
Ashley's come.
Oh, Ashley or Gus?
Anyway.
You go first.
Danielle, can you just tell people we'll do Zoom second?
Okay, we will do Zoom after in person.
I'm so excited you're here.
I'm so excited.
And I'm so excited you're here. And thank you guys for coming. We really appreciate it. So, yeah. Parents are not trying to be a pain in your backside. We just want to be a part of the conversation. We want to be educated. We want to know what's going on. And so we've been showing up and we've been trying to learn. And so it's just great that everybody is here and I'm just excited. So I have a statement to read on behalf of our secretary, Kate, who was unable to make it today. But I want to ask some questions first and then I'll read that for her. The Pond Meadow, can we go back to Pond Meadow? I just want to,
Yeah.
What's that about?
So Pond Meadow Park, created through legislation, special legislation many years ago, 70s, I believe. It's a flood control project, and part of that, they created the park. And because it bordered two communities, the legislation set up a commission that Braintree and Weymouth make up. I appoint commission members. They have a budget that's funded by both Braintree and Weymouth, and they have some significant capital needs that they've requested of us.
Okay,
So the commission has voted, submitted the request to us, and that's why it's on that unanticipated.
And operating, their health insurance is going up too. I actually have.
Yeah, on the operating side.
I have a meeting Friday with the Braintree CFO to talk about their budget request. I've already told the Braintree CFO that we are unlikely to fund them at the level of request that they've submitted. So that conversation will be Friday and we'll see where that leaves us.
so is that is a capital need or that's?
It's both. It's operating and capital.
Okay.
But traditionally, the last couple of years, the increases have been on the capital side, but now it's the health insurance is also factored into the I think it's 21% request increase.
So is that paying for employees? Like what is the money going towards?
Yeah, they have staff.
Question.
Yeah.
It's the Rangers over there.
Okay,
The commission members, I don't think are paid anything, or maybe get a stipend.
They're volunteers.
And honestly, that budget's negligible in the bigger picture of, we have $230 million. That's going to be a tens of thousands, difference.
I'm just a
No, I know.
Pond fan, that's all.
No, yeah, we're going to keep it open, but
Yeah.
not for 21% increase.
Where do I begin? Yeah, so when we talk about overrides, like I know some people have been doing a Prop 2.5 override. So what's the difference between like a Prop 2.5 override versus like an override?
So they're both Prop 2.5. One is for debt exclusion, which usually funds capital projects, like we did that for the school. The operational override is to pay for operating expenses. I mean, that's the short answer.
It's a permanent increase, whereas
Permanent, right.
the debt service, once the bond is paid off, that
Thank you.
increase goes away. tax increase.
For example, the Chapman override, Ted can give the numbers because I can't remember the numbers, but what's the schedule on Chapman? So that was approved in 2017?
Yeah, I think most of it, I think, is a 20-year bond because we got the low interest rate, so we were able to do less years. But again, that's directly on your tax bill, that the taxpayers pay. But once that bond is paid off, which was 90-something million, that tax increase will disappear from.
Where the operational override stays in place.
Okay, so one's temporary, one's permanent,
Yep.
kind of the
Yep.
difference. Okay.
And I think, just for background, I think there's only been two proposed in our, since the inception of the law, definitely in 1980. One was back in the 80s and it was crushed by some ridiculous amount. And then during the K administration,
2015.
there was another one that was proposed that was pretty soundly defeated. And I think the one
Vote
that,
is out on those two.
and that one she
And
proposed
Hilbert.
was for a mix of use, police, fire,
RIP.
I think some public works and schools.
Danielle mentioned like a real estate bill. So basically, as citizens, you're voting to raise your own real estate bill. So tax.
Right. As far as new growth goes, I am concerned that it's a vicious cycle with new growth. Because with Chapter 70 funding, the state is now expecting the town to provide more money. So, you've got the state side and then you've got the town revenue side. And when we do new growth, my concern is that they're asking more of us and taking away the state aid. So that's just my concern with new growth. I don't know if you have any insight on that.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what you mean, but are you hinting at, I've heard other people say it, that new growth impacts town services? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, it's just that,
Like what assessments?
I think what she's saying is they assume that when we have new growth, that people are gonna actually move into those houses and pay the taxes. So that is in our number, right? That's what they're saying, like, this is what you're projected as a town to get, city to get.
Or that you're growing,
have to
so
have
you don't need
people-
them.
But you have to have people actually.
That's
Paying taxes,
Well,
and we don't always get that right away. That's not you could build a house.
What
and not
she's
have-
saying is that if we show that we have new growth,
Where's that?
we don't need the state money as much, so
No,
they take
no.
away.
They're paying taxes whether someone lives in something
Straight,
or not.
they're paying the construction.
Whoever owns it is paying the tax, whether someone's living there or not. There's a tax on that property.
So actually, they don't factor our new growth in what they're giving us for Chapter
No.
70, if that's. what you're thinking.
I don't know.
So the reliance of our budget on local is nothing, they're independent of each other. So it's just the state just
Okay.
giving us that level amount.
I would say that about all of the state, whether it's unrestricted, local aid, all of the various local aid accounts. I don't think a major factor or a factor at all is how looking at new growth.
Yeah.
So they don't project.
The Chapter 70 formula, Brian can probably explain it best, and that doesn't relate to that.
We're not penalized by the state for our new growth.
Right.
That's, yeah.
thank you. I appreciate
And just to put in some perspective too, the local aid number by itself is a huge number. They're giving us $41 million toward our budget. So the number itself is a good number. It's the growth that's the problem. And it's only been growing at 1.7%, at least for Chapter
Growth in
70.
state aid.
Yeah. Yep.
Great.
It's a $41 million number, which is a nice number, but it's the
Go
growth.
back to the first slide.
Growth,
you know,
that's the problem.
Not literally, but if you go back to the first slide, look at that growth in the Chapter 70 number. It doesn't keep up with inflation. It doesn't keep up with teacher salary increases. It doesn't keep up with anything. It's a paltry figure. At the same time, that, again, the state budget is ballooning.
And that's what legislature says. Legislature says that formula is outdated, correct?
Yep.
Chapter 70 formula is outdated. That's the problem.
there's someone who's trying.
So it's complicated, and I spent 21 years there. And it was almost impossible for me to figure out the old local aid formula. And senior members used to joke that, and we were penalized under the old formula. It was weighted heavily for larger cities. And there was a reform done sometime around, I don't know, maybe around 2010 or earlier, when we went to UGA from the old complicated formula. And when I used to inquire how the formula worked, the joke was, it's on a piece of scrap paper in Mike Dukakis's desk, because nobody could understand it. And that was a positive reform that was done, whatever year it was, I can't remember, when we went to the unrestricted, and they sort of condensed different local aid categories into that new formula that was more equitable for places like Weymouth and
That was 93, I think. Was it after that?
I can't remember now, 21 years. Since becoming mayor, those things are a blur now, but it is complicated. You're not asking stupid questions at all.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so in your opinion, what needs to change in order for the budget situation to just get better?
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
And you can fill it in, because there's many, many answers to that question. Ted talked about the different accounts that they send us from Beacon Hill. We would rather have it more condensed and give us flexibility. I can tell you, after 21 years up there again, the game that's played, politicians like to create different categories and make grant announcements and get press releases out with it and all that. And we have that same frustration even when the legislature, when they do supplemental budgets, you'll see different earmark announcements. Some of the stuff we get, to be honest with you, we don't even need it. We don't want it. We don't need it. We lobby for other priorities when those things come through. I've had discussions with our rep and our senator on where that stuff would be better utilized. Those are smaller amounts, but just what Ted, to reiterate what Ted said before about having more flexibility at the local level, and certainly Chapter 70. I mean, that number is absurd. It's an unsustainable number for us to keep up with things. You know, if we had a maintenance budget, if you will, from the state, we'd be in a lot better position and not have to make up that difference every year, as our portion of funding local education has to increase every year and puts more pressure on us. And you know, the state's priorities seem to go in other places. Just the way I can summarize it.
Yeah, I would challenge the premise a little bit. The reality is, over the last 9 years, we've increased the overall operating budget by 36% and the school budget by 41%. That school average is 4.6% a year. That's healthy growth. So I do think there needs to be some discussion on how we spend it as well. Both school and, you know, we think about it all the time on the town side. I know some of it's mandated and not with us, but that's just the reality of municipal government. But the growth rate of our budgets in the last 9 years is fairly unprecedented over the history of the town and its budgets. So we're not in a, you know, budget growth crisis in my mind. That's just the reality of municipal government and public service.
Actually, we just want to have time for everybody.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I'll just read Kate's thing and then I'll move on. So this is from Kate Timberlake, 130 Mutton Lane. She said, as parents, we tell our kids, you get what you get and you don't get upset. And that's a great lesson for birthdays and holidays, but not school budgets. For school budgets, the squeaky wheel gets the grease and the adequate funding to meet the needs of the students in the district. You are tasked as members of the school committee to present a budget that meets the needs of the students and reflects the values of the community. Last week, members of the community voiced their values and said the school committee's budget, as proposed, did not reflect their values. That the school committee needed to propose a bigger budget to the mayor and town council that ensured the needs of students are met. That needed staff positions are filled and that programs like STEM be reinstated and not cut. I encourage school committee to be bold, be that squeaky wheel, propose a budget that meets the needs of our students, of our schools and our students. Make the mayor and town council make the tough decision to cut funds. The voters will know you presented a budget that reflected their values and desire to make Weymouth schools the best they can be. So that was from Kate.
And I appreciate
And
that comment, because I think, I'm glad we're back here tonight, because we do feel that superintendent, and again, we had a follow-up meeting with administration yesterday to say, hey, listen, guys, this is what we're asking. This is what we would need next year. It includes these high priority needs, and just so everyone's on the same page, that we hear everyone when it comes to, the additional assistant principals, nurses, coaches, that, there's these other positions here that exist. So as we've done the past 10 years, we're going to send this all over to the mayor's office for consideration.
And I just want to say thank you guys so much for reinstating the meeting. I really appreciate it. And again, I'm just so grateful that everyone's here working together.
Thank you.
Gus?
Yeah.
Glad you got your flip phone. You don't have a flip phone anymore.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, I want to thank school committee and administrators for listening to what the community had to say at last Thursday's public hearing. Up to that meeting, that public hearing was going to be pointless. So the fact that you listened to community comment and rescheduled this meeting, revisited the budget numbers, agreed to redevelop and publish the full additional needs list to inform and educate the public, the community, elected officials about the additional things that are still missing in terms of being able to deliver full service and to fully meet the needs of the school, the children of the school district, I think does you a credit. So thank you for listening to the public last Thursday. I'm going to repeat what I said at plenty of meetings. And by the way, I echo the fact, I think it's great that Mayor Hedlund and Chief of Staff Langell are here. I've said this at many meetings this year, and as I've answered questions of the community when they reach out to me, Mayor Hedlund's administration, Chief Staff Langell's efforts over the last numbers of years to bring us from the funding cellar that schools were in, going back to fiscal year 11, to the tune of millions and tens of millions of dollars in increased funding for schools on the net school, just on the net school spending side. You deserve an absolute amount of credit for doing that, and that's not lost on anybody. We recognize the funding challenges that exist at the state level and now potentially at the federal level cascading down. So we recognize that it makes no sense for Weymouth to be one of 200 communities that continues to receive minimum aid year after year after year. For fiscal year 26, it's only $437,000 increase over last year, 1.3%. And conversely, the state is then also asking Weymouth to increase their local contribution by $3-point-something million. We recognize that doesn't make any sense. We recognize that it's a challenge. We also recognize that aside from the net school spending piece, that is the operating appropriations budget plus additional expenditures that qualify for net school spending calculations from the town, like insurance and benefits, that those have also increased to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. I think last year was $18 million in addition to the operating budget. And we also recognize that on top of all of that are all of those additional kinds of funding initiatives, like the modular classrooms, like the $6 million to refurbish this particular building, all of those kinds of things. The town deserves credits for all of those efforts. But when you look at it, the state only cares about the net school spending data when they measure municipality against municipality. And despite all of those additional increases, when you look at the data, we still trail the state average in terms of net school spending by tens of millions of dollars, despite all of the great work and despite all of the increases in funding over the last decade. This meeting, I think we all wish would have happened earlier. This is tremendous information. It brings clarity, transparency, better understanding to the challenges that the town side faces in terms of balancing the budgets. I think in terms of the public upset, it's just maybe next year the timing would be better and this conversation can happen earlier so that the context of the entire picture can be communicated to the community sooner. I think the information that was presented tonight serves well to have everybody understand the challenges that the town side is facing in terms of developing a balanced budget, identifying the restrictions, identifying the state hurdles, all of those kinds of things, such that it would help to sort of prevent any kind of negative criticisms in bigger forums like the town meeting and those kinds of things. So this conversation, this presentation, I hope is repeated every budget season, starting next year and the year after that, because I think it brings a lot of clarity to the conversation. And if it were to happen earlier, it would be a tremendous positive effect to the process.
And if I could just say, while I'm thinking of it, it is timing. You know, the governor's budget doesn't come out till the end of January. We need a good 6 months of actual revenues to really know where we stand year to date on revenue projections. So it really is, timing. And that's why budget instructions, don't go out till departments until sometimes February, because we don't know what those challenges are until early in the year.
Yeah, I get that, Ted. I appreciate that. I guess I'm saying as soon as we sort of know, I think, the conversation would be great. And to have the mayor and the chief of staff participate in these conversations. You've heard it from the public. It's a huge impact to have that level of participation.
It's not the first time we've been to a budget
Yeah, we've
subcommittee
done that every year, but I think this year we are a little bit behind schedule from where we have been in the past when we did our presentation before school committee. So yeah, you're right on that. And there's a number of factors for that. Just a quick point about town meeting that you referenced.
Yes.
I'd love to see everyone come out to town meeting.
Gave them the
know.
date. It's
I
a
know.
How many people we had last year?
No,
I know.
Zero.
Right.
A town of 60,000 people, we had zero.
We put it out at the last meeting.
I know.
May 19th.
And then, just on the on the net school spending thing, I referenced this earlier, you joked about it somewhere or something. And maybe it's in here. But, when the welcome wagon pulled up 9 years ago when we got sworn in, the first thing sitting on our desk was a threatening letter from Desi about
Right.
Weymouth would be fine. So
Right.
we've had a big hill or a hole to climb out of and still climbing up that hill.
There's absolutely, Mayor Headland, and
If I was Hingham,
I recognize that.
problem solved. We'll throw an override out and they'll approve it.
Yep.
They do overrides like I change my underwear.
I recognize that. In addition to that, if I may, Madam Chair, at the state level, and I'm going to ask a question at the end in terms of advocacy, but there's another piece that I think you referenced that somebody shared a Facebook post with me. I'm not on Facebook, but somebody shared a Facebook post that you made and you were hesitant to highlight another challenge at the state level. I'll highlight it here. When it comes to millionaire's tax expenditures, 75% of the education portion of that last year went to only 25% of the student population. So it's not an equal distribution across the state. Weymouth got nothing, as long with a number.
Free lunch, that's
That's fine. Along with other municipalities. It's the bulk of the money goes to gateway cities, so cities and towns like Weymouth don't get any of that or very little of that aside from funding the free lunch piece. But that's not equitable. And I think that's just another example of the decisions that are made at the state level that negatively impact communities like ours. When Ashley was up here talking about the concept of new growth and potentially how that negative impacts, I just want to, the Chapter 70 formula does put a lot of weight onto what is called the equalized valuation number. That is the town's wealth ability, the town's wallet. So at some point, there's got to be a return, a diminishing return on terms of increasing the town's net equalized valuation, because that is a large component of the Chapter 70 calculation in terms of getting to the foundation budget for Weymouth. And maybe I'll just ask the question, is there some point where you get a diminishing returns on the value of the taxable property base, which is $13.4 billion in Weymouth currently? Because that is a component. Is that a reason why this in fiscal year 26, the Chapter 70 requirement requires Weymouth to spend $3.3 million in addition in local contribution?
We were a minimum aid community before growth.
Okay.
We're going to continue to be a minimum aid community. So we're going to get the minimum aid no matter what that number is, you know.
And it's driven by enrollment really, because we've gone down 20% in 10 years in enrollment.
Yeah, no, I know that's, yeah.
Why we don't get more, we get the minimum aid, it's a function of our enrollment.
I get it. Okay. That just, we're just tossing it out here because there's been questions asked about, you know, the increasing the size of the wallet is part of the calculation. And, you know, at what point does it not make sense? But if, you know, all of you know much more about that than we do. It's just something that really jumps at you when you look at the, you know, the Chapter 70 calculation sheet for Weymouth that when DESI publishes for every fiscal year, you know, the first number that's there is equalized valuation. Then you see what a large percentage that plays and how much weight it carries when they go through the calculation steps.
It factors in our foundation budget, but then it becomes what they will give us to the calculation, which is driven by enrollment. So you're right that the wealth does factor into what the number is, but what we get is a function of the enrollment.
Right. And so just two more things, Madam Chair. One is a question. Obviously, the mayor's on Beacon Hill all the time, regularly. I'm sure Mr. Langell is up there also. I'm sure there's communications that happen all the time. How does the community best advocate? I mean, you know, numbers of us have contacted the mayor. Obviously we contact Senator O'Connor and Representative Murphy, the ones that work for us up on Beacon Hill. But more globally, how does the community effectively advocate for Chapter 70 changes to make sure that the bill that's up on Beacon Hill that's looking to establish a new current Chapter 70 review commission, that actually passes, that actually things change in terms of Chapter 70 funding, that things like the promised charter school tuition reimbursement, which originally was supposed to be 100% reimbursement and never was, you know, how do we advocate to make sure that happens? How do we advocate for a more equitable distribution of the millionaire's tax that I referenced earlier? What's the best way, do you think, to do that?
I would say it's the traditional means. And the problem is right now, in my view, I think the legislature is more detached, isolated than they've been in the past. Power has become, and it's a trend that's been happening for 20 plus years, where power is centralized in the two presiding officers to a huge degree. Huge. It's been on that trend for quite some time. And the good news is, I mean, we have a Speaker of the House with unprecedented power in Massachusetts House of Representatives history that represents part of Weymouth. So it's a good person to drop a line to. Hit the two leaders and the governor, you know, just keep it in their ear. Change happens slow. Change happens slow on Beacon Hill. And, you know, you're talking about the review commission and,
right.
You know,
That's 5-6 years out.
If that even.
Yeah.
And
if it passes.
And a lot of the studies, audit studies and commissions are window dressing sometimes just to kick the can down the road, but it's just making noise.
And those opportunities are coming up. The House budget will be out in April and the Senate budget will be out in May. And so even though it's sort of passed when we submit a budget and on it, if they do increase it, we can come back with a supplemental budget and add.
I appreciate this exchange. Just a question, if the budget slide, Brian, I just want to be clear about something.
Yep. And you can always write in testimony for any bill.
Oh, no, we know.
I guess what do you got?
This one, Brian, sorry, the calculation slide budget.
Speaker of the House, by the way, is a former teacher.
Yeah.
Yes.
Longtime teacher.
And he represents.
And a longtime member of the.
Sliver of Weymouth.
He does.
Right, and he represents a sliver of Weymouth, but yeah.
I'm not throwing any shade on him. I'm not saying education's not a priority.
No.
But again, they need to hear it.
Their priorities are elsewhere.
So on this slide, I just want to be clear, the way that it's laid out. If you were to receive the $92,079,118 budget request, that precludes any of the 26 position eliminations?
Good question, Gus. I tried to footnote it the best I could that
Right.
let's say we got a 3% and then we're cutting 26 positions. So, but yeah, that's.
Okay, so thank you. So just to be clear, so if you get the $92 million budget request, that precludes the need for any of those cuts. It also precludes the need for the across the board user fee increases. right? Because that was that 120,000 projected revenue from that was to try to make up the $1.9 million deficit.
And that's the exercise that, Mel, the executive team, Jeremy, principals are all doing of like, what's the least impactful cut of 1.9 million to our school district?
Right.
And that's what the 26 positions would be.
So I'll just finish with this then. No member of the community has ever come up to any meeting and said, request $100 million. Nobody's ever said that. The communication from the community, including for me, I'll just speak for myself, has always been about asking for what you need in terms of what is it that you need the town to provide you to help fund what the students of the district need to be successful. I'm hopeful that next year, as I mentioned last Thursday, and by the way, I was asked a number of times, why I didn't reference the example of Newton and their multi-layer budget layouts, including what they call the Thrive budget, right? Why I kind of like dropped that bomb last Thursday, as opposed to my normal process, which is to discuss things at budget sub, kind of a little bit more offline. It was only because I was doing research and I came across that 2 days prior. That, everybody's going through their school committee presentations, and I happened to notice that from Newton and others. So if somebody was upset with me, because it's never my intent to upset the school committee or administrators, I never want to embarrass you in that way. That wasn't my intent. It was just a constructive suggestion that, I just found out about it 2 days prior, that hopefully maybe as we go through this process next year, I know it's too late for this year, but if we go through the process next year, we take a different approach to potentially to the budget development exercise, right? And to have administration provide some options to school committee as opposed to saying, this is it,
Yeah.
90, 92, that's it.
I love the Newton's words and
Yeah.
words thrive, but that's essentially what this is here, right?
Right, no, I see that. I see that, and I'm thankful.
Kelly Powers does a great job, but
I see that, and I'm thankful that this expanded new needs list, which was not on the table prior to Thursday, is on the table now, and that it's, going to be used to help educate and inform the community and elected leaders, and I include town council in that, about the fact that, in order to be more excellent or better, we would need $1.4 million over the next couple or 3 years, identifying those particular positions that you talked about. And then I'm really going to finish with this, Madam Chair. I would encourage this committee, administration, and Mayor Hedlund and Chief of Staff Langell and the town council to really target the $92 million. Education is a people business. It's not pieces of paper. It's not, and Superintendent Curtin can probably be upset with me. It's not curriculum. It's not even technology. It's people. It's teachers. It's ESPs. It's counselors. It's a human being industry, and it's all about people. So I would really encourage the group to work towards meeting at least the $92 million request so that we don't have to eliminate those 27 positions in fiscal year 26, and that we can move forward from that point, because that's on top of positions that were eliminated last year and programs that were eliminated last year. And because it is a people business, I think we need to focus on the number that would prevent the elimination of people positions that stand and interact with students every day. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Gus, just to piggyback, I think with the mention of Newton, there was some misunderstanding from the school committee meeting. Newton didn't ask for their Thrive budget. In fact, they didn't even put in for level services. It was more than the Newton mayor admits she preferred that they had asked.
Right.
But they went in really, really low. I agree with you. I do like the clarity and the transparency and how they proposed 5 different options. Right. But it was the superintendent who did give her recommendation of what to vote on. It wasn't like an a la carte pick and choose thing. I just want to say, I think it's important that we lean on our educational leader who we pay to lead the district to guide the process and to really say, this is a number where we can keep the lights on. We can do a great job keeping kids educated and safe. And this is my recommendation. So I just wanted to clear that up, that Newton didn't ask for $300 billion because that's what everybody wants for a school system. But they did, you're right, they did make that a transparent number.
Right, and I recognize what you're saying. And so again, my intent was, it doesn't have to be a carbon copy of that. It was just one example. And there are others out there, Rebecca, that can serve as models, I think, sort of like educational models. And I recognize that I've said this many times since Superintendent Kern landed in her chair. We are all super excited she's landed in that chair, that with her team now beside her, with Mr. Smith, with Mr. Byrne running HR, I think.
She's right behind you. She's coming in.
The new assistant superintendent, right? Well, with all of, we really view that team as a finally solid group that we're hopeful is going to really deliver the kinds of successes that have been missing over the last numbers of years. I'll say it that way. And Rebecca, I hear what you're saying. So it was just a suggestion I know I wasn't an allocation. And of course, the option, the different options from a Weymouth excellence budget to, a lesser excellence to a good, to whatever, as opposed to the bottom one. We always seem to be working from the bottom up. What's the top look like? And let's start working from there. Yes, with the recommendation from the educational professionals that are sitting at the central office. Absolutely. Right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, guys.
Can I just, I mean, I'm just going to give my side of the story. I'll put it in a positive. We've always encouraged every department in every one of our budget processes to give us their needs beyond what the revenues provide. Every year we do that, and we've done the same with the schools. And every year we get from every department the needs above what the revenues provide. The reality is this is a budget process. It's the mayor's budget process that's based on available revenues. This isn't a needs assessment process. It's a budget process based on available revenue. And that's what's reflected in our instructions. And that's what we're asking departments to give back to us. But then we do have those discussions, like I said at the beginning. For the departments, it's a spreadsheet, and below on that spreadsheet are the lines where they can tell us what they need beyond what the available revenues provide. And that's when these numbers change. That's the list we go to start adding things to the budget. And that's all I ask of the school committee too. How you develop that needs list and how big it is or how small it is their decision. But we do ask for it every year, and we have it. So we know, in addition to the budget that the revenue allows, we know what's needed beyond there. And over the last 9 years, we've provided almost $4 million and over what the revenue has allowed when we identified new revenue from that needs list for the school. So when we have it, we give it. But you don't, any municipality, and again, we've increased the school budget the last 9 years by an average of 4.6%. I go find a town that's done that. I don't know if you can. And that's based on that model of getting what the original revenue allows and then trying to find more revenue and address the needs list, townwide, including the schools, but the schools end up getting the bulk of it.
Yeah, I get that, Ted. I guess what I would point out is that the reason, despite all of those investments, when you look at it on a net school spending percentage or dollar basis, over the, definitely you've gotten us out of the hole that we were in. And maybe that's because we were in such a hole. Like in fiscal year 11, we weren't even meeting the minimum net school spending requirements. And you landed in your office, Mayor Hedlund, back then, and yep, you had the warning letters from DESE. You're outside the 5% band. You're going to be penalized. You need to fix this, and you did, over the course of those years. But maybe it's because the hole was so deep, Ted. I don't.
That's the reality. That's what we faced, and that's what we fixed.
Right.
We went from a million under net school spending to averaging $7 million over net school spending. I mean, if we do it your way, you're never going to be happy, because no matter where we take that 7 million, if it's 10 million, it's going to be everyone that's over 10 million that we're trying to get to. And that's just not realistic or fair.
I mean, you can call it not realistic or not fair. All I'm saying, I'm giving you credit for the recovery that you've put in place. But the fact of the numbers are that for whatever reason, 75% of the rest of the municipalities spend more on a net school spending basis on schools than Weymouth does.
But they haven't
the reality of the number.
They haven't grown like we have on net school spending.
I recognize that.
Year to year, our growth is higher
I
in
recognize
most
that.
communities.
But our spending is still lower than 75% of the 351 municipalities in Massachusetts. I guess I'm asking how is that the case?
Again, from $1 million under net school spending to averaging $7 million over net school spending. That's the reality.
Yep, and I give you complete and total credit for that. We'll just leave it at that because we'll just keep talking about the same issue.
Well, let me just make 2 quick points. In addition to getting out of that hole, and you've been active at this for how many years now? Long before I became mayor.
Yeah,
And not only was it the hole we're getting out of, you remember what the budget process was like?
yes, I do.
And it was backfill, try to reach back into free cash.
Right.
It was completely backwards back then.
It was an expectation.
It was not an honest budgeting process back then. So
Yep.
those reforms that we've done go hand in hand with what we've tried to do to get out of that hole. And just let me make a general comment, kind of like, budgeting for dummies comment, because I was not very good in accounting and math in high school. That's why I rely on Ted with numbers, okay? The great thing about this marriage here is he likes some of the things I don't like to deal with, and I like some of the things he doesn't like to deal with. So it's worked out pretty well. Been a good partnership. But if you're talking about a budget, I have X amount of revenue, okay? Picture that pie. And every year, the slice of the pie for the schools takes up a bigger portion of that pie. Every single year we've been here. And I've got departments, quite frankly, and I get we're in a group here, we're in a crowd that's advocating for schools.
Right.
I have other constituencies that advocate for other things. I got how many different bargaining units do we have here in town? How many?
We have 7.
7 major bargaining units, 7, right? I thought we had more than 7.
We have 9.
Yeah, right. So, we got all these little mini constituencies on the labor side. I got residents who have different priorities. I have people that don't have kids in school that really don't care about the schools, but they're upset about the condition of their road. I get infrastructure problems that we've inherited that you hear about, that if you tune into various planning board meetings or ZBA meetings, you hear about the infrastructure. And despite that, we're trying to balance all these needs. Quite frankly, and I'll say this, I'm not afraid to say it, I have departments that are more woefully underfunded than the school department right now. Despite that, if you look at our budgets, the schools clearly, based on the numbers, are the highest priority we have. Every year it gets a higher percentage increase than any other department that we have. And somebody said, when Ashley read the statement from
Kate.
one of your members, it's a reflection of values. Well, if you look at where the biggest slice, a greater percentage of the pie goes in the budget growth, where it goes in this town, it's going to the schools. And if you look at the attachment, and you referenced it, and I appreciate it, some of the additional things above and beyond the budget that we've supplied to the schools, that impacts our capital budget when it could be going to roads or it could be going to other improvements. I think that is a reflection that we see the schools as a priority. So, I take exception that anyone that is going to try to hint that or state that, we haven't made education a priority here.
I do have,
And I'm not saying you've done that, by the way. You just happen to be sitting there at this
Yeah,
moment.
that's fine.
And I have a question for you I wanted to ask for 9 years.
Uh-oh.
When are you going to run for school committee?
I get that all the time.
LBJ had a quote, right? About the tent.
Which is it?
You can look it up. I think we had a couple history teachers.
Yeah.
just on the,
Tell you about
this is
it.
for another meeting. I think it's work that I'll do probably for the next year is that the net school spending, we talk a lot about this, and I think it's really a function of it's comparing yourself against yourself. So it's tough to compare it across the state. What do I mean by that? I think the growth and the revenues that we've invested in the schools, the denominator in that equation is the foundation budget. If that's growing because of the wealth and success in the town, you're never gonna get ahead. So I think you've dug the hole out. I think the new revenues are coming into the school budget, but I just, that net school spending metric, I want to look closer at that. That's something you could probably help me with, Gus. We talk about we're 75, it doesn't make sense in my head when I hear the numbers from Ted, and it doesn't make sense in my head that we're in the lowest 25 percentile.
Right.
I think it's a function of that, the growth of that foundation budget. I think it's growing is a slightly greater rate than what we're investing, but I think that's a false thing to focus on.
Yeah, the challenge is obviously that from the state's perspective, that's the number that they look at.
Yeah.
You get a warning letter
They need a
because you didn't hit your target, right? The minimum required net school spending number. So that's that from the state's perspective and from the community's perspective, that's all we have to look at in terms of the data that resides on the DESI website, which by the way, is populated from input from each of the municipalities, right?
I don't want to prolong it.
That's the only number that we have in terms of comparing, how are we doing compared to Hingham and,
I think it's a best metric, and that's not any.
Braintree, and not just our neighbors, but across the state. And I mean, the numbers are the numbers. The data is the data. They're not my numbers. There's the data that municipalities have submitted, including Weymouth, that resides on the DESI website that is then used to measure and track how a school is
For next year.
doing in terms of school funding.
It's already on the list.
And do a deep dive in the net school spending foundation.
Right.
When you mentioned compared to other communities, this discussion is going on everywhere. It's been noted. And it's right now a more I used to represent some of those towns that
Yeah.
you referenced and that we read about in the paper. If you look at what's going on in Situate, Cohasset, Hingham, it's Braintree. They're having a much more difficult time than
They are.
last year.
They
That's
have-
the reality.
Our situation is not as bad as many other.
So when I talk about constituencies, you even have that within the schools with parents who probably weigh into the administration over different programs within the schools where they see different priorities.
Yeah.
We have to contend with that. It's a microcosm of what I have to deal with at the town level, the needs between different departments. And, you know, I don't want to single any out, but
No.
I have a couple that I think are woefully underfunded right now, to be honest with you.
Yeah, so I'll just simply state the statement that I've said for a dozen years. A successful community cannot exist without a successful school system. That's just a fact of the matter. It's the primary attractor for families to set roots and all of those things.
I disagree with you to a point, okay? It's symbiotic. You can have all the money going into the schools. If you don't have good roads, if you don't have good infrastructure, somebody criticized playing fields, right? Which have nothing to do with the operating budget. That's out of the capital side. If you don't have all these amenities in the town that increase property values and make the town more desirable, that affects the schools.
I would.
That was a problem in this town, as you know.
Yes. And I would agree that it's a set of things, but in my mind, and I think in young families' minds in particular, the first thing they Google is, what are the schools like? And, not to toss this out on the table now, but I don't think that, well, it sets a goal, which I already know that superintendent and the team has.
I'll give you a concrete example of when I ran for mayor, a former member of the school committee that ran for mayor, I remember got up and said, I'm going to hire an economic development director. Okay? There's 100,000 that could go to the schools that maybe isn't going to go to an economic development director. And I said in that debate, I said, I'm going to be the economic development director. There's someone who did well, who's from Weymouth, who has enterprises in other communities. I said, when are you going to invest in Weymouth? I'm not interested in investing in Weymouth. And that was based on, even though he grew up here, it didn't fit the demographic that was his target audience for his businesses, right? Over time, he said to me, I like what I see in Weymouth. And it was on the infrastructure improvements. It was some of the amenities. That person is now investing $120 million in the town of Weymouth. It's going to provide for new growth that's going to help fund the schools. So again, it's symbiotic. It's everything. It isn't just the schools. I have to balance that. And as I said, I have departments that are underfunded. And I'm saying that at a time when this, and this isn't a condemnation of the schools. I have a school-age kid myself. I can relate to everybody that's interested in this. It's everything in its totality in the schools, comparatively speaking, and that's my responsibility to prioritize overall again. And the schools are doing better than other departments I have that have needs. And that goes to that reflection. You can say the schools are a reflection of a community's values. I think they are in a very, very big way. It's the biggest part of our budget. But there's a lot of other things that reflect that too.
Right. It's the biggest part of
It's
the
the
budget.
biggest
It's
department.
the biggest department.
Right.
It's got the largest
Exactly.
employees. It's got the largest infrastructure. That's why
I
that
don't want to
number.
leave the wrong impression. It's the most important.
Right.
Based on the work it does, the size and the impact. I agree with that.
And so please just zone in on the 92 million as the minimum for fiscal year 26, so that we don't have to deal with the people reductions of an additional 27 on top of what happened last year. I really,
It's just troubling to agree. And I'm glad the question was asked. What can we do to impact things on Beacon Hill? Because it's frustrating for us. as
I
we
bet, I'm
work
sure
on
it
this Every
absolutely
year.
is.
And our pie is limited. And then I see the state budget balloon
Yeah,
and our percentage of chapter 70 doesn't keep up with even the rate of inflation, never mind other fixed costs and increased things like that.
yeah. So to that advocacy and then Mayor Hill, I would suggest to school committee, you should be penning a letter from the board that goes to the governor, to leadership at the state, at Beacon Hill, that addresses these issues. That
As a committee discuss.
talks about those kinds of things.
All the time,
Right,
right?
including, and I would also suggest, even though we're not in that environment, that similar activities take place in terms of communications from boards from the town council or the town of Weymouth as well. You know, community members can do their part, but I think elected officials are more knowledgeable, more involved, have better access. And so I think, but together, I think we all recognize that we need to try to, address some of the challenges that exist outside of the municipality.
Just, I promise this will be my last comment on this. Not.
Both trying to get the last comment.
21
He's
years,
the mayor, he can keep on going.
21 years in Beacon Hill, 9 years as mayor. I know my math is bad. I think that adds up to 30, okay? And I would say that in terms of values coming out of Beacon Hill, and if you look at the state budget, this is the worst reflection of values as it relates to education in 30 years, in my opinion. If you look at the numbers. Simple. I mean, I went in, what is, anyone can tell me the state budget right now? No.
But the total state budget?
Right now, what are we up to?
66,
30, 40, what is it?
no, 62 billion.
42 billion.
What is it?
62 billion budget for fiscal year 26.
When I went into the Senate, it was 12. It hit 12 and everyone was in a panic, okay? And now we're, and as a percentage, again, I'm repeating myself, but let me condense it and say, based on the trends, based on a percentage of the state budget going to education, it's at a lowest percentage, I would suspect, in 30 years, without a doubt.
Yep, I would agree with
So
that.
what kind of a reflection of values towards education is that coming out of Beacon Hill?
So again, I would,
You just said it perfectly in one sentence, like.
so I would encourage that you use that particular sentence as part of a board communication to Beacon Hill to help advocate for changes to those priorities and changes to that process. That's
I
it.
could just say, as far as, people advocating, I don't think politicians writing to politicians is effective. Just from my time up there. I think it needs to be coming from the people that are most affected. I mean, it's our budget, our numbers, but it's the families and the employees that get the impact of what we decide based on the available revenue. I think it's more effective when those people as a group, not just individuals, but some, as a group are contacting the folks at the state legislature.
Quote you?
Not the politicians.
No, that's
writing.
a great sentence. Like, it's a really
Same
good.
people in.
The additional frustration is a lack of civic understanding of the process too.
Sure.
That is diminishing.
Yeah.
And that's scary.
Yep.
Beacon Hill has become more alien to people, the average citizen, in terms of how things operate
That's true.
and what the process is. It's scary.
It is.
And I'd love to see
I believe,
focus on civics in this.
I believe that the Massachusetts legislature has been identified as the #1 least transparent
That too.
political body in the country.
And by the way, I think it's Sunshine Week this week, right?
I don't know.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a
Thank you.
tremendous conversation. I appreciate the fact that both of you took time to extend your days tonight and to join this meeting this evening. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks, guys.
Well,
Thank
you
you,
sparked some banter and made it enjoyable tonight.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Glad to do my part.
Yep. When.
Sorry, I'm going to prolong our evening.
It's okay.
All right.
My name is Ben. Thank you both for coming and explaining everything you explained tonight. I thought it was extremely enlightening and it was very beneficial to just see and hear. I just had a couple points that I wanted to make, some of which Gus kind of already touched on. It comes down to the definition in my head of satisfactory. And when,
Can I just ask who you are?
oh, I'm sorry, Ben Crosby, father of a kindergartner and a pre-K student. I live near the landing. So, for me, it comes down to when do we want to be satisfied with what we're doing? I think very much like we've been talking about different towns around us, people we're dealing with, in many ways, the schools in Weymouth are competing against the schools in Quincy, against the schools in Cohasset, or the charter school here or the charter school there. And what I'm concerned about is that through the fantastic strides that have been made over the past 10 years, and I want to emphasize that because there's no lack of recognition, or I want to make sure that it doesn't come off that I'm not recognizing that movement, that what is tremendous growth, we don't ever feel satisfied with that. And the reason I say that is because, we admitted that we were at the bottom of the barrel. You walked into a situation that was, weak. And let's say 4 years ago, I had $20,000 in credit card debt. And I put in more growth in my payments towards my credit card debt than anybody else. And I got myself back to, let's say, $1,000 in credit card debt. I don't know. It's all relative to your baseline, I think is what I'm saying. And so we have had tremendous growth. It is wonderful and it is appreciated, but I don't want us to sit and think that we've made it when for something like education, we should always be unsatisfied with where we stand. We talked about a lack of civic understanding in our populace. It just made me chuckle. I'm like, hey, I know where to teach that. In our schools, one of the things that came up tonight was, and it's funny, I gave Brian a little bit of a hard time last week about this level service term. I know it is a industry-wide term, as I did my own research after you shared that with me. But I do want to emphasize that I think it still is misleading, and it can be the acceptance of declining service. Because keeping level service this year to next year isn't paying attention to the cuts that were made last year. It isn't paying attention to the staff decreases that were had to made. And it goes back to baseline. What level of education are we comfortable with or is satisfactory? Is teaching STEM to K through 5 students is that not satisfactory, even though the research shows overwhelmingly the impact that has, especially on a community that lives outside Boston, which was the original Silicon Valley and has some of the most intense job markets in that area. So you're right. You have a pie that isn't growing large enough. It's not growing fast enough. Yet we're not, we want to see the schools excel. We don't want to just see us meet some needs. We don't just want to see us get to a certain point. We want to see the schools excel because, again, I want people who are looking at this area to come to Weymouth instead of Hingham or Cohasset or Braintree or Quincy. And when they view the outcomes of our schools, that's going to be what draws them in. But this comes to kind of like legacy. And we talked about overrides, and I'm glad someone brought up overrides because I've been mulling over operational overrides. I know that they seem to be political and they seem to just be like straight suicide in Weymouth, that nothing gets accomplished. But it really sounds like we're at a breaking point where we're not satisfied with spending in this department, in numerous departments, because we simply don't have the money. Does the State House need to step up? I totally agree that the State House needs to step up and do better. But I also was taught very much from my father that you take what you can control. and you do the best and strive to do better with what you can control. And so what I am hoping and what I'm advocating for is that for not only the parents sitting behind me, not only for the school board and my town representatives sitting around me, but for everyone, that we not just put forward a budget that is not, that we're striving for more than simply satisfied, and that we make the point that maybe we do need to make a structural change in this town and do a slight paradigm shift and realize that if we want what we want as citizens, we actually have to pay for it. And maybe we need to start talking about an override. And maybe that needs to be advocated for, not just by a young father, not just by a single mother, but by everybody sitting in this room loudly. So again, if I could, Superintendent, I wanted to say for 1 second, there was one thing you said, and I appreciated it, but you made one comment that I did take slight exception to. Advocating for what we need is not tone deaf. Coming at it, not understanding what is being advocated for, it can appear tone deaf. But advocating for things that you know are investing in the long-term well-being of your children and your town, that's never tone deaf. And if it comes across that way, maybe we need to do a little more educating around that part, and maybe some of us can also work to help that. So what I would say to this group, and what I would really ask for is, you know, the legacy is built by doing something that hasn't really been done before. Legacy is built by doing something that is harder than people thought you could accomplish. And it really feels like we are at the crux in a moment where we need to do that, because 92 million is not enough to do the educational work that our kids deserve in this changing climate. And with that said, with the economy, that's also, if we have to go back to 90 million, we're assuming there's going to be attrition. And I have a pretty good idea that if people are looking at their retirement accounts right now, they're going to hold on another year or two. So that 26 staff reduction may turn into 30, or it may turn into 33, or who knows what. So sorry, I'm pontificating to you all right now, but I think it's time that we step out and do something a little harder. And as we step out and we advocate for a little bit more. And yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else here? Elizabeth?
I will be brief, but I will echo a few of the comments. That I think advocacy is key, and we have to do that as partners. And I think us as the school community need to do that and not solely rely on our elected officials. Having done advocacy for the last 10 years up at the legislature for a variety of things, it is important for them to hear from us. They respond to you, and I think probably preaching to the choir here and now the choir back here, because these guys have come to learn. They have been coming to meetings to learn. But what we need to hear from you, and once, you know, maybe once this budget is in, all of that, where should we be advocating? I mean, we need to partner in that. Like, what should we be doing? I mean, Bob talked about it. Ron Mariano, he's somebody we should be speaking with. He used to come to some of these school committee meetings. He used to come to town council. But those are the things I think we can do. I mean, this was an excellent presentation to understand the totality of what the town is looking at. You hear bits and pieces of it if you go to meetings, but this was really helpful because I think people understand this is what we're looking at. We don't have final numbers, but this is what I believe is going to be happening, and to work within that with our advocacy. I'm thrilled about the needs list, because to me, that's educating our community. It's not that we're saying we're requesting all that money, but our community needs to understand. There are people who I happen to be involved, but there are many people who don't have kids in the school system and they don't understand what the needs are because they never see them. And I think that's something maybe that can be published a little bit more, that school is, okay, the school committee, basically, they're playing along with all the other departments in town. But they also are saying, these are realistic needs that we have for the children in the town of Weymouth. And we want you to understand that. And that's where the needs list, I think, where people were saying we wanted to see the, sort of go back to the complete needs list. And I don't think we're trying to say, we don't believe you guys at all, because you're the experts, we're not. We can help. But, coming from you, coming from the principals, we need to know that, we need to get out there and we need to educate folks. So I would look forward to, working with whoever to help with, we talked about this briefly, Danielle, before about action alerts. Action alerts, if you get them out to people, you give them the template. Here's your, we have the state senator and the state rep. This is what you guys should say. If they start receiving all of those, it's easy to push the button. They have to respond because you vote for them. So, but again, thank you guys for coming here. Pleasure to see you. And Bob, I was going to just throw a little jab in terms of, I'm hoping we can throw some more money in the curriculum line item, given that we need to change the books to reflect the executive order that you issued regarding
The Gulf of
Weymouth. So I'm just saying.
Well, our intelligence has determined that you, since you grew up in Hingham, may be
Oh, it's a bias.
double agent headed into Weymouth.
There's somebody else, though, that I believe grew up in Hingham.
I renounced my citizenship. I was still a teenager when I left.
Well, that would be true, but you still made an impact.
Well, actually, the precinct that we are annexing is where your home is, so you're safe.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I'm good, and I won't say that I will be wearing one of the T-shirts to the candidate forum that I will be doing for the Hingham election.
Yeah, I don't think so.
For your advocate friends that are here, her mother was a substitute teacher at my grammar school. And her mother had the same last name as the school, and she used to lead us to believe that the school was named after her.
And that was my brother, so he was the one that was
No,
the,
your mother led us to believe.
no, I know, well, she knows better, but Wally didn't. So, but just so you know, there was somebody else from Hingham, but I think that's a really good reason to give more money to curriculum, because you got to change something in the current curriculum. Okay. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Well, actually, the executive order said at the next printing.
And I believe
Anyone?
Anyone on?
I just want to, because I don't want to say frustrating because it's just part of the process, but with the town, the reality is the town is the only one creating revenue and budget growth right now. So the frustrating part was, and again, I think it's going to be insanely difficult to pass an override when we've grown our part of the growth so much. And then to hear, state aid be brought up but then it's no, it shouldn't be that's where the hole is. We're doing literally everything we can, and we've proven it here with numbers on the town side and the growth. So it can't be, hey, local aid, but that's where the hole is. We're doing everything we can. We've increased the revenue, again, schools 41%, the town 36% over the last 9 years. We've created, the new zoning that's created new growth. So we're doing our part. We just don't feel like others are doing their part. And I just think more of the focus needs to be there.
With the exception of the one-time funding, maybe.
I tried to move.
For anybody on Zoom, can you raise your hand if you'd like to say anything?
We have Robin on Zoom. Robin, I think you can unmute right now.
Yep, thank you so much. Hold on, I just want to turn my video on. Oh, I can't turn my video on. Okay, that's okay. I found this evening to be really very informative, and thank you all for hosting and being here tonight and really speaking very openly. I also found it very interesting and encouraging to hear Mr. Langell say that we're not in a school budget crisis. I prepared a brief speech before tonight's meeting, but I still feel it's relevant to share. I appreciate the chance to speak tonight, and over the past 17 years, I've been privileged to work alongside many dedicated individuals at the Pingree School. As a mother of a 5th grader and a 1st grader who attend public school in a neighboring town, I am deeply personally invested in the educational system, both professionally and personally. I have concerns about our current budget request that is being presented to the town. I acknowledge the considerable effort that has been gone into managing the existing financial constraints. However, I feel that maybe using predetermined figures that do not represent the true needs of our essential students and staff to succeed and to thrive. In my opinion, real inclusion classrooms should be organized based on performance and needs of students rather than being limited by staffing or scheduling constraints. Inclusion and co-teaching models must allow teachers to collaboratively and effectively work on their planning. Kindergarten classroom exceeding 25 5- and 6-year-old students presents challenges, even for an educator with nearly 35 years of experience. It is vital to have a robust support in reading and math with professionals specifically dedicated to those areas. While we've implemented a rigorous curriculum in ELA, we continue to face challenges in math, and thanks to those reading coaches too. Post-COVID, the social emotional needs of our students have grown increasingly demanding, with often overshadowing their academic requirements. Additionally, our English language learner population has increased significantly. I'm always focused on what is best for my students, missing opportunities to engage with hands-on engineering and technology through STEAM initiatives feels like a step backwards. Furthermore, teachers are not consulted about the possibilities of expanding the elementary schools by adding a 9th school. Instead, decisions were made on what is financially favorable for the district, leaving some schools still full, for lack of better word. I appreciate the positive impact that ESCA funds had, which have positioned our schools strongly. However, it's critical to continue to advocate for the resources our students deserve. Why shouldn't we proceed in requesting what is right for our students? While it may be too late to make these changes for the budget this year, and I trust that Brian has invested a considerable amount of time in this matter, I do urge you to plan for our future. I am proud to be Weymouth, proud of my students, my colleagues, the administrators, and the community. We have been progressing with great momentum, and it's such an essential that we sustain this progress rather than apply our brakes. So thank you for considering these thoughts and for all of your hard work.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Robin.
Robin.
No more on Zoom?
Oh, not yet.
Last call on Zoom? Come on off, Mary.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Shea. I'm co-chair at West Augusta Parent Council, and my daughter's in 3rd grade there. It's the best school. I love it. And I've been coming for the past few months because I really want STEAM back, and I think that's a lot of people have been coming elementary level. And parents that have been coming up and speaking, like Ben, who's a rock star here, are really just frustrated because they know the teachers can do more. They know the school wants to do more. And then they're just run up against the staffing, all these cuts that have been made. And it's just so hard to hear. And I feel like I've dove into so much math with Brian and Gus, and I've gotten such a great education over the past few months. And to hear 4.6% growth every year, but then every year we've had cuts, and every year we've had teachers had to leave. And then we have our elementary education really suffering. Like I hate saying that, I'm sorry, but meaning, this 5th special and everything, it's just comparing us against other towns is all that moms and parents can really do to really sit there and say, what do our kids really need and what do they really want? You know, I know when my kid comes home after some of those days, it's like, well, what was today? Oh, this was kind of boring, you know, but then there's other days where it's amazing and engaging. And we just want that like every day for them because the school can do it and can provide it. So going back to the stats that you've kind of said on the budgets, you know, we compare ourselves to these other towns that are doing more net spending, but you're saying that their growth is higher than ours, and that we're still having growth at 4.6% a year, but yet we're still having cuts. I don't understand that.
So the cuts piece, last year was the first year we had cuts. So we've grown about above operating level service. We've grown about 52 positions in the last 10 years in addition.
Okay,
And we netted down about 10 last year.
okay.
So we're still, as of right now, we're still like 42 positions above net school spend, sorry, I guess it's term my head, above level of service over the last 10 years. So we haven't eroded investments, additional investments that the town's made over the last 10 years.
And of those, how many were ESSER funded? There was many were ESSER funded.
Correct, right? So
And a lot of it wasn't even told to the school committee that
Yeah.
those positions were funded with the one-time funding until after. the fact.
Until the funding went away.
Right, until all of a sudden we're like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, no, I
Cut
the
those?
4.6 numbers also, so we've been talking about 3.8 and that's on me. That's since I've been here, it's been 3.8. I mean, I'm sorry, it's 7 years since it was like, yeah, since I've been here. Ted showed me, hey, if you go back one more year, there was a supplemental budget and you factor in FY16. That's why the 9-year average is really 4.6%.
Okay, gotcha. And then the one comment that you made was Weymouth will get minimum aid no matter what changes and what growth enrollment we get? Is that?
Until the formula changes on Beacon Hill.
But if we know that if we're up against that for like a few years and we know it's not gonna change, then as parents, and I think I asked this the first time I came, Brian, well, how do we get more revenue and how do we change it? And you answered that in that one, and that's fine for the school department, but as a whole, like, I get it. You guys have made it crystal clear, you know, that there's so many priorities in the town. But as parents, you know, this was my other point to make, is that the timing of the budget is January to now, and it's really quick. But so as parents, we're showing up in September. Miss Keith was showing up in September, saying what our school needed. And maybe that's the thing, to really understand and feel what the school has needed since really the beginning of the school year, and what last year's budget and how it affected the parents, the staff, the teachers, and the kids mostly. I just couldn't come up here and not say it again. I'm sorry. I know.
I want to answer any questions, though. I think from an advocacy of like what could impact us right now would be the extent the state could fully fund circuit breaker, that would be an immediate impact positive to us.
Yeah.
Circuit breaker and charter school reimbursement.
That would be transportation.
Which all have been promised when they were created.
Yeah.
The state is great for unfunded mandates. They
Create the
tell us
law.
we have to do this and they don't pay us.
And we have federal mandates we have to contend with too. We talked about that at the department head meeting today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for the comments, though, but I just want to answer those couple of questions.
Thank you. Thank
The
you.
process is year round. I mean, in reality, it's year round. I mean, we just don't know some of the revenue numbers until this time, like the governor's budget that comes out every January. But we're talking about the needs and also year-to-date current budget and where we're at and what it looks like. We are literally having that conversation year round.
And I want to say it out loud, because I know this is one question you answered and it was awesome. When I said, well, how much would it need to be for STEAM to be back in the budget? And you said around 400,000. And then the awesome list that you guys made has it at 256.
I mean, essentially, it would be.
Yeah. I just had to say that out loud. It's
If I can just,
$256,000.
the mayor brought up a great point of like the pie, right?
I know.
You're here for STEAM, right?
I know.
We have it from K to age 22, right? And we've heard you, we've heard the STEAM. 4 STEAM teachers means 4 more out of the middle school, or 4 more out of the high school. So we're always trying to make the best decisions so that when your child gets to the middle school, you're not like, hey, not, forget about STEAM. Now
Yeah.
I want 4 more science
And I'm
teachers or
getting,
whatever
I've
that
got a couple
is.
comments directed at me saying, I'm cutting it.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, look, I'm not sitting in Melanie's office micromanaging what staffer goes to what school here. I mean, we're handing you your slice of the pie.
And it
Some of
wasn't
that's-
Melanie either that got it. I got your back. But no, I have to just say it out there because it's such a small number and it would impact the schools so much. And that's just what I came here and what I've been coming here since September 4. But I'm gonna come
The
for every
first
other.
thing is Mrs. Fred's gonna tackle.
Okay?
Will, and I do, I'm not at the big table yet.
Thanksgiving table.
Say when I hear suffering, I promise.
Oh, gosh, I know.
The
I'm
people
sorry.
that are in the building today.
Oh, yeah.
they're-
Yeah, because it's part of the overall.
Right?
Yes.
We
Exactly.
understand, but they're getting an excellent education and they're
Oh,
happy and
yes.
well-rounded. So I do have to just.
Oh, of
as for
course, I
all
know,
of us,
I know.
It, do we feel it? Yes. And do they? Yes. And I wish they could love every minute of their day.
I know.
But I do want to just, that word worries me because they're having great experience.
And I wouldn't put my child anywhere else in the world. West Augusta is the best school. Thank you.
Where Murphy is.
I'm all excited.
Katie, if you want to unmute, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, guys. Katie Montero, 8 Chauncey Street. I just had a question for Ted and,
Oh, we lost you, Katie.
Oh,
That, I didn't do it. I was waving over there.
Her mic's off, I don't know.
Yeah,
yeah, Kate, you might have to unmute again. I'm sorry. Try it again.
You should be able to.
sorry, it just muted me and then I wasn't allowed to. Thank you for. I just had a quick question for the mayor and Mr. Langell. In your presentation, you had stated that in the line item school choice, it was near state expenses, that there was a budget for $409,357 for school choice. But the school committee had voted to not participate in school choice. So I'm wondering if that's some money that would go back to the schools.
So that the vote is for accepting students to Weymouth for school choice. We have no choice. We have no choice. But people can do school choice out of Weymouth. That's what the assessment is.
Okay, so the assessment would be for us to send kids to other districts.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, Katie.
Good thought, though.
And that would be mostly,
Yeah.
like we were saying.
Anybody else on Zoom?
No fuck Aggie.
I'm seeing none. Any more in person?
The only thing that I have, Danielle, is March 27th is the next full school committee meeting. That's where the committee will vote a budget.
Great, thank you, Brian. I will take a motion. I think-
One last thought.
Yes,
I
sure.
just want to say one little positive note as we end this meeting. I don't know how many people here lived in Weymouth before the charter change of 99, 2000.
My whole life.
But, you know, one of the drivers of that and why it was overwhelmingly voted by the residents of Weymouth was the infighting between departments. Departments literally suing other departments, and the lack of cooperation between departments. And I've seen different, in 9 years as mayor, I've seen different levels of cooperation between the school department and administration. 21 years as senator, watching how other communities that I represented interacted, how the school departments interacted with boards of selectmen. We're the only city form of government in the old Senate district. And if you look at, people kept saying, well, look, comparing ourselves to other towns. If you look what's going on right now with the difficulties that we're all facing as communities with school budgets right now, and it is universal on the South Shore. It's creating infighting in some other communities where you have huge disputes going on between boards of selectmen and school departments over funding issues, where they have to go down and negotiate memorandum of understandings and signing basically contracts with each other as to how they're going to approach the funding over a certain number of years, for instance, in Cohasset. And there's arguments as to whether or not that agreement's being lived up to. I just want to say right now with Brian and Melanie, the level of cooperation, the communication, there's transparency, whether people believe it or not. I mean, Ted puts it all out there. The level of cooperation is very, very good right now, better than I've seen it in 9 years. Gus makes the point, should we have started earlier? Maybe. It's a valid point because of where we've been in years past. But these guys talk, as Ted just said, it's a yearly process. This goes on all year. And not every little meeting is televised. So I just want people to know that. And I really appreciate the cooperation and the effort that they put in on the budget.
Thank you again, Mayor Hedlund and
I
Chief
do
of Staff.
prefer the meetings where there's beer involved.
Sit high one more time.
I would like to make a motion as a member of school committee. Leave some waters out for us.
That's high. It's not in the
I don't want to impact your budget.
Melissa said no.
Water's off the list.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Bob,
We adjourn.
Bob can second it.
Somebody say second.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.